I rejected an Ivy League, my state school, and now I'm getting ready to pack my bags to move to China for university. As you can imagine, I've received tons of conflicting opinions on this subject, which I cover in more detail in another video, which I will link up here. But today I'm going to provide a more detailed explanation to the internet and myself as to why I made that decision. The main driving force that really encouraged me to make this decision in the end was the fact that, unlike some people, I genuinely like China. I like the people, the culture, the language, and even the environment. I know a lot of people dislike the government regulations and kind of restrictions that the citizens are put under. This is me editing, and I just want to note that the restrictions that I mentioned are very vague, and I'm not like an expert on government politics or anything like that, so take what I say with a grain of salt. There are definitely parts of the government that could be adjusted and improved, but I would say that that can be said about any government really, because it's not always that black and white. There's gray area, and there's a lot of things that might be interpreted differently depending on each individual's perspective, and I think that's something that we need to start learning to accept and be more receptive of. My cousin has lived in Beijing, China for her entire life. I talked to her because I was pretty curious about what she thought of whether or not she was facing restrictions, and she said it didn't really bother her too much. She didn't feel like she wasn't able to do the things that she wanted to do. It wasn't something that like kind of ruined her entire life or made her experience growing up in China awful. And so I guess just what I'm trying to get at is I like China as a nation. I don't necessarily support everything that the Chinese government does and enacts, and I don't like all aspects of the country, but I think that anything in life comes with pros and cons, and through lots of contemplation, I kind of concluded that the pros of living in China and getting that international experience, would be something that I would regret not having tried to do. And I have always felt pretty connected with my culture, my language, and my ethnic identity, and so because of that, I was really inclined to try out going to university in China, as that would give me a better perspective of my culture and language. And a second key factor that I considered was the cost. A college education in China is significantly more affordable than in the US and in other countries. To put this into perspective, going to Beida University or Peking University would be around $3,000 to $5,000 US depending on whether I went to the medical school or the main campus at Peking University, and that tuition would be each year. And when you compare that to the $90,000 tuition of Cornell University and many other Ivy Leagues, or even the $30,000 tuition of my state school, UT Austin, the $3,000 to $5,000 sounds a lot more doable. And of course, my family was willing to support me and pay for that college tuition if I did go to Cornell or Austin, but there would be a higher chance of me needing to take out loans, and it was just really something that I didn't want to do. I didn't want to put myself or my family under that financial pressure and burden and situation. Due to that consideration, China seemed a lot more appealing in terms of financials as well. On top of the fact that international students are often eligible to apply for scholarships, which would allow them to often even study for free. For me personally, I didn't get a chance to apply for those scholarships because I wasn't heavily considering going to China at the time, so I didn't think to apply to them, which in hindsight was not the best idea. But I will be going forward, like next year and the year after that, I will constantly be applying for Chinese government scholarships and other scholarships that Beida offers, and I hope that that will potentially allow me to go to school for free. And a third thing that further convinced me that I wanted to go to China was the opportunity to experience a different education system. I've grown up with the US education system my entire life, and there's nothing wrong with it necessarily. I think that the GPA system is fine and does help encourage students to work hard throughout all years of high school. And I also think that it's helpful that there are standardized tests for the SAT, ACT, AP exams to evaluate the academic capacity of each student. And although there are certain policy changes that have been made with the SAT and ACT, like test optional and such, but a lot of that is reverting back to pre-COVID. I do think that those standardized tests are a good standard to have in place to differentiate each student and their academic abilities. However, I feel like overall the college application process is very subjective in certain instances, and there are a lot of toxic things within the application process itself, which I talk about in another video. And when you compare that with the very objective nature of the education system in China, in which students are admitted to college based on this one exam called the Gaokao, or college entrance exam, that all high school seniors take. The discrepancy between the two policies is very apparent, and the education system in China is sometimes perceived as more vigorous than in the US, and there are definitely pros and cons to each side. For example, when I talked to my cousin, she indicated that she would often start studying from like 7 a.m. She would go to school and then stay there until 5 p.m., come back home, have a little dinner, rest, and then have like extra classes that she would take outside of school, sometimes going up until 11 p.m. And so like that kind of grind, cutthroat nature of school isn't necessarily amazing either, but I do think that I wanted to kind of have the chance to experience what education was like in China and kind of compare and evaluate which one I like better. And so I felt like going to Beida University would give me that opportunity that I otherwise wouldn't have in the US. And I think it never hurts to expose oneself to different learning environments, and that's just something that I've always wanted to do. Another major component that drove me to come to this decision was the option to live in China. I feel like going to Peking University would allow me to get a feel of what the lifestyle was like in China, and I would be able to compare that with my experience in the US and kind of judge which I like better. So going to Beida would allow me to have that option to stay in China if I so chose, versus if I went to UT Austin or Cornell, then I would most likely not be able to even have like the foundational language skills to live and thrive in China for my future career and life. And if I'm being completely honest, I've never felt truly American, if that makes sense. I don't know if anybody has ever felt the same thing. There's that stereotype of Asian people, or East Asian specifically, being bananas, yellow on the outside, white on the inside. But I personally feel yellow all over, if that makes sense. And I think because of that, I might feel a little bit more connected with my Chinese culture once I do get to understand that a little bit better. I've always wanted to feel more connected to my ethnic heritage, so I think that going to China would give me that option and potentially staying in China. And on that note, one of the final main reasons was the fear of losing my cultural identity. I feel like sometimes for me, I worry that somewhere down the line, I'm going to continuously lose bits of my culture, bits of my language, and bits of my identity. My Mandarin is already not up to par with that of my parents, which makes sense because that's not my first language in the first place. And I feel like if I stay in the States, the chances of my kids not being able to speak Mandarin are fairly high, or at the very least, there's a very high chance that my children will have broken Mandarin skills and not be able to communicate fluently in Chinese. To some people, that might not be that big of a deal, but for me, I've always felt proud that I can speak Mandarin relatively fluently, and I don't want my kids to kind of have an identity crisis almost in terms of like not understanding their culture. And so not being able to speak that language which we are culturally tied to just seems very sad, to be quite honest. And I'm not saying that assimilation is a bad thing, but I guess just a part of me doesn't want to lose that connection with my ethnicity and with my culture and language. And I feel like going to Beida would broaden my perspective and give me that opportunity to become more connected with my culture, so that even if I come back to the US, I will still be able to teach my children what I learned while I was there and have that kind of experience to help educate my children in the future. If you're interested in knowing the process and steps that I took to come to this decision, and as well as the opinions that everyone provided me while I made this decision, please feel free to check out this video here. And if you guys enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you could subscribe to this channel for more content about my journey. See you guys next time.